que empezaré dando las gracias a Elisava por permitirnos, dentro del máster en diseño gráfico, traer a gente que nos gusta y que nos interesa. Y nada, hoy tenemos la suerte de tener a Ben y a Paul, a los dos, dando una conferencia, lo cual es algo extraordinario, porque normalmente solo va uno de ellos. He tenido la fortuna de coincidir con ellos en una conferencia, el infortunio de haber perdido contra ellos en algún concurso, y nos gusta mucho su trabajo, nos parece muy interesante, y además es una historia muy particular de cómo alguien monta un estudio con trabajo global, manteniendo una esencia en su trabajo muy buena. Y nada, sin más interrupción, os dejo con Ben y Paul. Thanks, Ben and Paul, for coming over. And, it's your turn now.
Is it on? Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Is mine work? Oh, that's better.
We're good?
I have no idea what Paolo just said then, so I thank you, but maybe it was really offensive. I don't know. Hello, Barcelona. This is great. Thank you. Thank you. You're in for a treat tonight. Maybe. Ben and I have never spoken together, and we've created this talk just for tonight. So this could be brilliant, but it could be an absolute disaster. You can decide that. We'll be taking feedback later. But what we want to talk about, I think, tonight is a bit more about us. Our backgrounds, how DesignStudio came to be in the first place. We're going to talk a little bit then about a couple of projects that we've done, and then I think we're going to end up with a bit of advice to anyone
a few thoughts.
Yeah, a few thoughts to anyone who's starting maybe their own studio after university or whatever. But I'm Paul, by the way, just so you know which one we are. We're a little like a comedy double act, it seems. So you better know which one Paul and Ben is. I'm Paul, I'm the CEO, and this is Ben.
Hello.
He's CEO of DesignStudio. But I've known Ben for an eternity. In fact, we met in 1995, and looking at the audience here, I don't think many of you will really remember 1995. It's a long time ago, and we go. Oh, thought someone had a question then already. It's a bit early. We grew up in a place in the north of England, so we both went to school, and we met at a local art college. And this is back in the days where really art wasn't seen as one of those great subjects that you studied. It wasn't a science and it wasn't a maths. It's kind of elevated now into a much better subject that people have much more respect for. So it was actually at the college where most of the people were learning how to change car tyres or fix a toilet that was leaky or something like that. That's where our art college was as well. But we met there, and I think it was in a place called Scunthorpe, which is a beautiful town.
It's a beautiful town, yeah.
And what we realised today, walking around, was that there's so many parallels that you can draw with this city of Barcelona. I mean, Ben, you...
And Scunthorpe, yeah, so we've got a few slides here just showing you how the kind of cultural similarities between Scunthorpe and Barcelona. So the first one, obviously, the Gaudi Cathedral, a beautiful kind of testament to design and art.
Yeah, which sculpts the skyline, and we realise it's a lot like the steelworks that we have in Scunthorpe, which again, beautiful industrial spewing smoke across the town.
Yeah, La Rambla, beautiful avenue where people can stroll, and the tree-lined streets just make you feel beautiful, and the warmth of the sun coming through really kind of struck a chord with us with Scunthorpe as well.
Yeah, because this is our high street, and it's again very similar. You can buy a scooter or get your nails done, or bet quality lines at low prices. So it's very similar. And then of course sport that you also have.
Yeah, so obviously we all know the Camp Nou, or Nou Camp. The cathedral, as it were, of modern football. 100,000 plus people, I believe, can be crammed in there. Very similar to our
Glanford Park, which this is the height of the season, where you can see that we're filling those stands. And we have big European nights at Glanford Park as well, because quite often the Iron Bar that's there hosts an Italian night. So yeah, it's very similar. And then finally, I think, is obviously.
So yeah, obviously Barcelona, the team has one of the greatest footballers of all time playing for it. But you know, they're really, obviously we know that Messi's Argentinian, but you know, this is one really strong similarity that Scunthorpe had. We had our own Spanish import playing for Scunthorpe United.
Alex Calvo Garcia, who was a Spanish imported player for Scunthorpe, lifting aloft the League 3 playoff trophy. And I was there on this day.
Yeah, we were
What
there.
a hero. So that's great. So it's very similar. This is exactly the same. In fact, this is a home from home for us today, which is fantastic. So then, look, so we grew up there, and as a lot of people do, we actually wanted to get out of Scunthorpe fairly quickly. So 1997, Ben and I actually ended up at the same university. I don't know if you want to talk about this.
Yeah. So this is Loughborough University. So Paul and I, we'd met when we were 16 at the college. When we were 18, we went to university. Loughborough University actually is more famed for a sports university, but it had the first year of a new degree. So this was kind of interesting for us, but maybe also they just took us because they were desperate to fill places on the degree. And
that's the only photo from that age I can find. It's slightly depressing looking at it.
Yeah, that's not Paul's girlfriend in the background. That is a very...
But I think the thing that, you know, as university does, it was great to learn about design, it was great to learn about typography, but actually one of the bigger things for us was actually, it kind of opened our eyes to what was out there, and we also had 2 visiting lecturers that came from London, and I think it was our first insight into seeing these people who'd started their own company. They were doing this work that excited us so much, like seeing the vibrancy of what London could do and meeting these people, making these connections. It started to kind of make us aware, I guess, not just of the craft of design, but also, you know, what the future potentially could be for us and where we could potentially go. And I think it really focused us on looking at London.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the great things that always sticks in my mind about these tutors is they organise a day trip for us to London. And we're talking kind of 1998 here, and this is an exhibition that happened in London. It's a bit of a seminal time. It was to celebrate the young British artists, so it was people like Damien Hirst and Tracy Emin and Sam Taylor Wood. And this was this collection that was brought together. And for coming from Scunthorpe, like one year when you're looking at the steelworks, and then a year later you're exposed to all this kind of culture in London. For us, it just kind of, I think Paul maybe felt the same. It was like we knew this was kind of our future. As soon as we finished a degree, we knew that London was kind of calling for us.
And there's also a strange thing happening in London at this time. I don't know if anyone recognises this guy, Simon Waterfall, but he's someone that we actually know now. He's moved to San Francisco, but he had a company called Deep End at the time, and this was just the time that the internet, it's just probably hard for you to believe, you know, we didn't have email accounts, we didn't have anything, but then all of a sudden the internet just arrived, and this .com thing was absolutely huge, and Simon Waterfall was riding the crest of this wave. He all of a sudden had this company that went from nothing to like 200 employees in so many countries around the world, because every company realized they needed to be online, they needed to have this website. And so there was this really exciting thing happening in London in terms of lots and lots of companies starting up, jumping on this .com, I guess, bandwagon, and then starting amazing things and growing really quickly.
So yeah, so essentially come to graduation. We graduated in 2000, and for us, there was only really one place to go. We'd been offered jobs actually in and around the university town in places like Leicester and Nottingham, but we turned them down, and we just knew we had to get to London. So we went down there, and I got a job at the BBC, and Paul, you actually took a job with the tutors at the time.
Yeah, so those 2 tutors that came in, I actually had I had a few offers from some agencies, and they were bigger agencies, and I was going to go in as a junior, but those 2 tutors, I think the thing that excited me at that time was there were only 2 of them, and they were starting on the beginning of this journey, and I had the opportunity to join them and be number 3 in that office. And I think it was there that I already had I weighed up the excitement of being part of something that could potentially be big and being a bigger part of it, or being a small part of something bigger. And it was that excitement, even at that age, that I wanted to kind of go in that line. So I turned down those 2 jobs and I joined them, and sat with them hoping that this company would potentially become one of those bigger agencies working on much bigger work. But I felt like I was a fundamental part of it. But London was amazing. I mean, coming from Scunthorpe, and I know the joke's over now, yeah, it's not a great town. There's not really that much culture there, and interest in art and design just wasn't there. And coming into London, where there was this huge, rich culture of design, and really at this time, Shoreditch area, which I'm sure some of you know, which is the home of basically where all of the kind of designers seem to sit, was just thriving, and it was a time of experimentation. It was a time of people just starting their own things and seeing if they could work, and it was like, you know, it was that entrepreneurial spirit that sat there.
Yeah. Yeah, and so essentially, there's, as Paul was saying, there's just this amazing hub of creativity, and it's places where all these kind of crazy creative ideas are starting up, and things like Vice magazine. I mean, Vice now is this huge media outlet, but in 2000, it was a free magazine that you could pick up in the pubs that we used to go to, and you used to get there and say, oh, Vice is out today, and it would be gone because everyone was just eating up, and it was just a real reflection of the time of this. Not quite exactly sure where it came from, but there was almost like a reaction to the bankers in the city. And I don't know if anyone's been to Shoreditch, but Shoreditch is literally located right next to what we call in London the city, where all the banks are, and you can see it. And so at one end you've got the suits, and at the other end you just had this amazing kind of creative output going on. But no one knew where it was channeled and where it was going, essentially.
But it was great to be part of it. I mean, you could see anything in Shoreditch, and it did get parodied a lot on TV, and there was a program which I was going to show you a tiny clip of called Nathan Barley, which really was the rest of the world looking at Shoreditch. And the horrible thing was, it was a reflection of Shoreditch, and the horrible thing was, it was absolutely true. I don't think one thing was not actually really spotted on the street. So we'll play it, and this is what Shoreditch was like.
The idiots are self-regarding consumer slaves, oblivious to the paradox of their uniform individuality. They sculpt their hair to casual perfection. They wear their waistbands below their balls. They babble into handheld twit machines about that cool email of the woman being bombed by a wolf. Their cool friend made it. He's an idiot too. Welcome to the age of stupidity. Hail the rise of the idiots.
And so Shoreditch was literally this, and I think people, you know, it was great in one sense, and it was also just everybody just pushing it as far as you go, and people just wanted to almost be noticed for being the most out there, the most conflicting against the city person that was there. So it was brilliant, but it did gradually grow up, and I think what we saw was that, you know, gradually as we were there, and so in 2000, I guess through to like 2005 kind of time, you know, it started to kind of like be the place where lots of the big brands wanted to be seen, because that all of a sudden gave them a tick in the checkbox of, yeah, we kind of understand design, and we're part of the design scene. And so places like Box Park would pop up, where, you know, these freight crates would just be filled by brands like Nike and Adidas, and they'd have them as pop-up stores. And the same happened with the agencies as well. So the agencies went from being literally, I guess, people that would do anything, had no respect for clients, like we don't care about money, and they'd kind of rise up and then disappear, as Deepen did with Simon Waterfall, into a little bit more commercial, and still holding the design side of it, but a lot more kind of commercial in terms of a place to be.
Yeah, I think really what happened and what we saw over essentially since 2000, maybe to where we are now, is that that amazing sense of creativity, that love of craft and doing things different, actually really matured into business. Like my Vice magazine is a great example, and I think that really reflects and comes through in some of, I guess, where we are as an agency, of that still maintaining that kind of that fun and that play and that creativity into actually kind of cultivating that into actual livable business now.
So we were like there during this time and saw this transition, and during that time I said I started at the small design company with just 2 people, and I stayed there until around 2006, and I think I stayed there a long time, and I didn't really want to leave, because I always wanted to believe that the next job was going to happen, we were going to win it, and we were going to get to that next level. But I think after 6 years, I realized it wasn't going to happen. And I could see, if I'm honest, that those founders had lost a bit of that ambition. And so I had to leave and start doing something else. And it was probably around this time that Ben and I even talked about DesignStudio.
Yeah, so I'd worked at a few kind of more boutique agencies, people you maybe heard of, Spin, C, Saturday, who are now Wednesday, so go figure that one. But they were really great boutique agencies, but I left them and I went freelancing to Sample, and it was around 2006 that Paul and I kind of came together, and we'd both been freelancing for a while, and maybe Paul at some of the more kind of bigger brand agencies, but we realized that there was another way of doing things, and we started to formulate the ideas about what would become DesignStudio. It took us a long time to kind of really start to get things put into practice. But it was around that time we just started thinking, you know what, there's the big brand agencies and there's the boutique agencies. And the boutique agencies, love the craft, and we completely 100% appreciate the ethos that went into there. You know, stroking paper and sniffing ink on press and all those things. Then there's the big brand agencies, and from our experience, they just seem to forget design. Design and creativity seem to be at the very kind of end of the process. And so for us, this was a bit of a frustration and something that we essentially thought, can we kind of make sure that both worlds can live together? Can we create an agency that cares 100% about the craft and 100% about the branding and the strategy that goes into it and the method?
That adds up to 200%, I just realised.
Yeah.
But that's fine. That's why we want to give it an agency, 200%. But yeah, so I think what we did during this time when we were freelancing was we almost used this time. We'd finished the agency, we'd had the idea of starting, I guess, DesignStudio. We used this time to learn and to absorb. And so our kind of like placements of where we wanted to go as freelancers were very tactical. So I wanted to go and feel moving brands. I'd heard that the culture was good there, but I heard that they work people too late, and I wanted to see how that balance happened. But I saw that they were kind of an interesting branding agency that were new, but kind of competing against the bigger people. But then both of us also wanted to try and understand what it's like to be client side. So we tactically ended up at Nokia, which I think in about end of 2007, 2008, actually had a really strong internal design team, and it was a great opportunity for us to join them and just to see what those frustrations are on the client side, not just on the agency side. And it was a really good learning for us to take on board to try and formulate what exactly DesignStudio could be.
So yeah, so 2008, we were at Nokia, we were freelancing, we made some great relationships, but we were offered jobs at Nokia. So it was not a great time economically as well. The world was about to enter an interesting period, but we politely turned those jobs down. And the reason why is we knew that we wanted to start this agency. So 2009 came around, and this happened. The world collapsed economically. People thought it was the end of capitalism. There was going to be this new way of doing things. Banks like Lehman Brothers were going insolvent and disappearing, and this was when we were going to start.
Yeah, so we'd had the conversation about starting, and you can imagine, like, we had, I think, £5,000 in the bank. We had no clients. We'd just been offered jobs by Nokia. Just before we left, they said, you know, why don't you come on board? Why don't you join us? And for me, it was easier to say no, but Ben had just had his first child. Here's a photo of that child. It's not really Ben's child. I just want to point out, I don't put Photoshop skills on my CV, but that's pretty good, I think you've got to admit, in terms of that. So, you know, I'll just leave that with you if you need any Photoshopping. But yeah, Ben had just had his first child, so that you can imagine that there was the worry. I remember that Christmas, we'd finished, you know, for Christmas in about, 20th of December, and we had a good 2 weeks sitting around thinking, is this the right decision? We've just turned down jobs. Are we going to really do this? But I think the belief was there that, do you know what, it doesn't matter. There's never going to be a right time to do this. If it's not when Ben's had his child, it'll be when I've had mine. If it's not the economic collapse, it'll be something else. So there's never going to be a right time to do it, and we just need to just go for it now.
So in this time, 2008 through 2009, we really defined the principles of what we wanted this agency to be. I think we've got some of them to show you now.
Yeah, so we discussed a lot, you know, what's the difference, what are the frustrations that we have, and I think the big thing we talk about is this, meaningful difference. And if you visit our site, I mean, we try and talk about this a lot. And I guess, you know, Ben talked about the difference between those big agencies and the small agencies, you know, very much focused on design and craft, and then one very much focused on big brand thinking, but actually the design falls away. And we did want to bridge that gap. We wanted to offer that level of craft to those big agencies, to those big brands. But I think the other thing is that what we didn't want to become was just a company that are creating nice visual graphic elements that actually have no substance or purpose behind them. And what we wanted to do was build upon everything we did, every decision we make, every piece of visual kind of design that we make needs to be based on a solid foundation. And so we came up with this term of meaningful difference. So what this means is, yeah, to any client, whenever I talk to them, is like, of course, we want to make a difference for your business. We want to make your website, we want to make your logo, we want to make everything we do look fantastic, but we need to build it on purpose. We need to help you understand, like, what makes your company amazing? What is that one thing that, like, makes you different from everyone else that we can kind of, like, find, build into a proposition, elevate, and make sure that every piece of communication that we have ladders back to that purpose. So there's a truth behind everything we do. And it's something that we present to clients, but it's something I present to all my staff as well. You know, when we ask them, we try not to say, just pin your work up and tell us how good this work is. Yeah, you've done a lot of stuff this week. We try and say, well, what's the meaningful difference you've made? You know, what's the big substantial difference, the big purpose-driven difference that this work makes? And it shouldn't matter whether it's the huge strategic start of a project, a massive thing, or a set of pencils that the client asks as a piece of merchandise at the end. You should be questioning everything of how it builds and ladders back to that purpose. So that was the one thing we wanted to offer our clients. The second thing I think we want to do is this. We want to become creative partners. So especially at the big agencies, what we found was that relationships were terrible. And they were building and paying a fortune for big client services teams and new business teams to establish these amazing relationships with these great brands. Then they'd start the work and those relationships would just dive because those people who were good at kind of talking to people, who were good at presenting, just disappeared because they were on to the next piece of new business. And they were left with people who were like, yeah, we've won the client now. We've got the bills, the contract approved. Let's just get this out the door and on to the next one. And that was what we learned from Nokia. There was this huge frustration of working with these agencies. So we just didn't want that to happen. We didn't really feel the need to have surplus people who didn't actually input on a daily basis, who were just there to make day-to-day sales or new business. We just realized that actually we need to put the designers at the forefront of what we're doing and actually bring design back to the forefront of business. So whenever we work on a project, the people who go into the room will either be me, Ben, they'll be sat with James, who's maybe our ECD, or Pete and John in the US. And those people will be there from day one right the way through to the last day of the project. And it's that about building that relationship, giving them that assurance, and making sure that there's a real kind of like strong partnership throughout. We also noticed that when the creative partnership is the strongest, when the relationship's the best, that's when the best work comes out of the studio. If there's a tension, if it's fraught between the client and the agency, I can guarantee the work will just turn into crap. I mentioned this earlier. I think we're really good at this, and it's something that we have to find with every brand, and if you don't believe it's there, again, there's not much point taking the job on. It has to be a client that excites you. It has to be someone that you believe in the product or whatever they're doing. And what we can do is, like, even if someone's like sat with this company and they've built the most amazing thing and they don't know how to tell people, we can help them sit and absorb what they're doing and unlock that thing that makes them amazing and then bring it to the forefront. And I guess this is reiterating the other thing, we're better together wherever. And it's about building those relationships and then not just thinking of it anymore about this is our studio, this is our sanctuary, no one comes in here, our doors are locked and we'll present to you in 3 weeks. It's about opening your doors and inviting the kind of, I guess, the clients in. Something we've found, and you'll see now, especially when you all go into work, etc., is that clients and brands have huge internal design teams. They don't want you to be a bolt-on that sits at the side and they don't talk to you and you present every 2 or 3 weeks. They want you to kind of absorb that team, educate that team, work with that team and work holistically and as one. And that's what I think we found with DesignStudio is that we're trying to work together. And so a lot of our projects, and I think Airbnb is a great case study, one of the comments from the founder was that he couldn't tell the difference between his team and ours. And that's a huge compliment to us because I think that means that we're really building those relationships. Do you want to talk about the name?
Yeah, so the name. So I think, where does it come from? We spent a lot of time trying to think of a name. We had the worst names.
Absolutely true. We spent ages thinking of this.
Since we first had the inception in 2006, I got married, I went traveling. We were sending emails to each other with names like, that meant nothing. And there was agencies in London at the time, more kind of advertising agencies, were called like Funky Monkey or something like that. And we knew we didn't want to be anything like that. And then there were other agencies like North or Spin or C that just seemed to find this one word that was just cool. But for us, we definitely wanted. Yeah.
We really wanted one of those names. We did really want one of those names.
But we kind of, stumbling around, we kind of came up with this name, DesignStudio, and really just boiled down everything that we wanted to be and what we believed in. And really, all those things Paul talked about a few slides ago was this idea of design and putting design at the forefront of everything. And it's the first word in the name, and it's quite generic and it's quite obvious maybe, and there's no ownership. But for us, it really kind of just sums up that principle of design is everything, and that can mean so many different things, and you can interpret it in so many different ways. But it was just making sure that designers were at the forefront of all the jobs, and design was the first word in the name.
And we also kind of, I mean, at the time it's hard to convince yourself, but this is something we also tell clients. It's always good to get a bit of Shakespeare into your presentation. It elevates it a little. It makes it a little more highbrow. But this is absolutely true. It's the meaning of that name will become whatever you imbue into it. So whatever you build, whatever you create, people will start to understand that name differently. And so it's really hard when you're naming a company or coming up with a name for a new brand to believe in that name. It's even hard naming a child. Ben's got 4 children, so he's been through this 4 times. But it's hard because you're like, is this right? Is this a Theo? I don't know. But you realise that over time they grow into that name and you start evolving to it. And so we knew and we hoped that DesignStudio would be the right name for us in the end.
Yeah, so this is the date it all happened. We quit our jobs, said no to the jobs, we stopped freelancing. And we went for it. We put all this thought and we put all this worry and the economic collapse of capitalism coming to an end and the world blowing up. Put that to one side, and this is it. This is our very first day. This is me, obviously, uploading some software to a computer that was my own personal computer that I brought from home.
It was definitely legal software that we were uploading onto that computer. Definitely. Thanks, Adobe.
So essentially what we'd done, we had rented some desk space, actually from the tutors had a shared office. Our tutors at Loughborough had their own agency, as we said, and they had a couple of desks free. So we took them, and that was it. That was our startup. We just brought our computers from home, and we took the desks. And the 2 blue chairs, that was our first major purchase that we sweated over immensely.
It's also our first business lesson because we didn't realize, when you rent desk space, not desk and chair space. Yeah. So we turned up with Max and we're like, what are we seeing? There are no chairs. Oh, great. That was our whole first day, was finding two chairs.
£90 it cost us, and that was big.
And the rest of the day was literally doing this. I mean, we had no clients. It was clicking, I don't know what we were hoping for, clicking refresh on our email. Anything? Oh, not yet, no. And then, you'd see it load for a minute, maybe. Oh, no, it's not, it's finished. But that was it. We'd made some good connections. We'd done something very clever, like we'd used the last, place that we were, Nokia. Tactically, we went there on purpose. We went there to learn about a client, but we also went to learn if we could take that client and build a relationship with that client to be our first client. And eventually that did happen. And I think our first job was this.
So essentially, I think, if memory serves us correctly, it was a €175 job, and this was, I think, after 45 days of staring at an empty inbox, this job came through, and we were very, very happy, to say the least. But this job came from the relationships that we had built, and relationships is a huge part of what we really pride ourselves on at DesignStudio, even from way back in 2006 or 2008 when we were working at Nokia, right to the very present day. And it was that relationship that we'd kind of made that led us to get this first little job. And this little job was basically creating some artwork of a logo for a mobile carrier and Nokia, and just placing it correctly.
Yeah, we're not making the logos, literally taking the logos, putting them next to each other and supplying the vector artwork. That's as big as it got. But, and this is what I think you've got to understand, if you are going to start an agency, you can't, you have to start somewhere. And this was it, and it's all about building relationships. And we did that job, we were happy to do it. We sent it back, we did a great job. And it opened up a little bigger job in the next week, and a bigger job, and a bigger job, until we entered what I think we like to call our blue period.
Yeah. For those who appreciate the little nod there to Picasso, I hope you were well noted.
Okay, so do you want to go through this?
Yeah, so I'll go through this. So this was essentially, became our founding client, and this became a massive client for us. We did so much work for Nokia. It's impossible in the time we have to kind of really talk through it, but essentially, before we started working with Nokia, this is what they look like. Just want to point out, this is none of our work up here. This Nokia was a brand that was driven by marketing. It had no overriding brand, and whilst we were in Nokia, they'd done this huge research as to what their brand recognition was and if people loved their brand. And people kind of liked Nokia, they felt good about Nokia, but they didn't recognise what Nokia was. And you can just see here from the collection of the work, it was just massively disjointed. But again, it was a brand that was driven by marketing. So for us, over a period of time, we worked with the internal brand team. We really kind of changed them to be something much more modern, more cleaner. And this was a set of guidelines that we created. And what we did is we stripped all the, excuse my language, shit away that was being put out there. And we created this quite restrictive set of guidelines that the brand team could send out around the world. And it was based around two things. I mean, it was called Pure, Simple, Meaningful. And that was essentially the whole point of it. It was just, if you can't do nice work, just do something pure and simple. But it was based around two things. It was based around people. So Nokia did have quite a lot of brand love. I mean, you have to go back to when Nokia was actually a brand that we used. But in 2009, you know, people liked Nokia. It had been a part of their life. They didn't feel bad about Nokia. But the kind of, for us, the main thing to tap into there was the stories that they had, this kind of connection. They talked about connecting people. They actually had quite a lot of like authentic stories about farmers in India who would use Nokia to get rainfall forecasts and stuff like this. So there was lots of really good feelings there. So it was about using those people and those authentic stories. And then it was the product. So Nokia were going through, obviously the iPhone had come into the market and started to disrupt it. But Nokia had started producing some actually really beautiful products, and it was based around this, these principles called Fabula that they'd been developing in their product department. But so these were the guidelines, and these guidelines led to years of work. And Nokia really, as a client, drove us massively. But we've got a film next that kind of encapsulates essentially what this guideline document led to. So I'm going to play that now, and it kind of does the story better than what I can do. Is it going to play?
Press it again.
So that is an encapsulation of our work that really, you know, we did so much. We created brands for them, we created launch product videos, we created research videos, we created apps, we created broadcast graphics. So much work came from that, but it was all pivoted back to those brand guidelines that we created back in 2009 with them. And really, this client, Nokia, from that small little opening of that artwork document we sent over, really kind of started to drive our growth. I'll hand over to you on this one.
So yeah, so we went from those two desks that I was sharing with that first business I worked at in London, and we ended up having to first of all pay people in that office not to come in. So you can imagine how that went down with those old bosses of mine who'd been at this for 6 or 7 years, and we hadn't gone from 3 people to 4 people. All of a sudden we were going from 2 to 8 to 10 people really quickly, and we needed space, and we had to beg, borrow and steal because we were growing faster really than we could keep up with. So we actually got in touch with a friend of mine who'd also started a studio around the same time, and he had this floor below him, and we moved in there for a while, and this was that space. And then we found our own space. I think this was in 2010.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and what you can spot here is, look who came with us. Not this guy, but the blue chairs. They're still there, but we finally upgraded them to a nice set of Aeron chairs in the end, which we still use today. But they stayed with us for a while, just in the background. And this business grew. I mean, From a commercial point of view, people will tell you this, and I can tell you this as well, you should never build a business based on a single client. And we were absolutely based on a single client. I mean, that Nokia client went from that €175 job to I don't want it crass, but millions of euros jobs. And our entire business was built on it. And we had financial people saying, this is ridiculous. Your whole business, like, you're 2 phone calls away from your entire business disappearing. Nokia's not in a great space; they're disappearing as well, and your business is based on that. And we knew that. I mean, we're not stupid. We knew that. But what do? Do you ride this wave? Do you grow with this client? Do you use that funding to actually grow the business that you want, so that then you can go and get those other clients? Or do you turn it away and stay small and try and balance it with other jobs? And we took the decision to grow the business with that client, and grow a business that we then knew we could push out to other bigger brands, because we'd be of a size that they knew they could work with. So in 2012, this was the office. So this was our 4th office?
Yeah, this is our
4th office in 3 years. And it just filled up. It was ridiculous. And this office actually goes that way. I think the most that we're in here, we got to 60 people in this office at one time. And I'd say 96 or 7% of that was Nokia work.
And 1 toilet.
And it had 1 toilet. And I'd say 96 or 7% of the staff were men as well. So that was terrible. But it grew and grew and grew. And I think we had lots of departments. We had a lot of production departments, artwork departments, designs. But we had kept true. So what we were using the funding for was, like, we were finding amazing design talent. Not just in London, from around the world. We were trying to bring in the best people from the best agencies, trying to bring that mix of talent coming from the studios like the Seas, the Spins, the small boutique places, talent coming from the big brand agencies, always trying to keep this balance. And they were working on Nokia work, and we were trying to keep those staff interested because they were working on the same client day in, day out. So it was a constant battle for us. But what it did do is it meant that in 2012, we finally moved into the office in London that we now have, which these are just some photos of it. So we were driven so much by Nokia, we had to grow up a lot. We had to have meeting rooms that were locked and key carded, because obviously we're working on, we were working on prototypes of products that couldn't escape from those rooms, and so everyone had to be ID checked. So we grew up into official no window meeting rooms. But it did give us this, like, we had amazing breakout spaces. We had the ability now to find a studio that worked for us, so no one had to completely sit at their desk. We had places now for people to sit, have their lunch, sit together, have big company events. And this is the main workspace that we have now in terms of working. We tried to keep, I think what's really nice is we always had that singular bench down the middle of the desk from that first photo, and we still tried to keep that. The desks just got longer and longer until we had to have 4 of them. But we've always tried to keep that way of working that's very open, and everyone kind of moves around, etc. So this is the office, this is how it's looking now, and that's the kind of London office, which took us up to 2013. And I think we always knew, as I said, that Nokia, it wasn't on stable ground. There was nothing really that the brand can do. The issues were the products weren't keeping up with the Apples, they weren't keeping up with the Samsungs, and so we always knew that we were in dangerous territory. And I think in 2013, and the end of 2012, we made that conscious decision of, like, now we have to move. We have to kind of start attracting other brands, other work, to try and diversify our business and reduce that 90% of Nokia work down.
Yeah, so Airbnb. So Airbnb came to us at a point where, I mean, in 2013, 7 years before 2013, if you said, has anyone what phone have you got in your pocket? Everyone put a Nokia up. In 2013, if you said, what phone have you got in your pocket? Everyone would have said an iPhone, most likely. So iPhone had disrupted the market. Nokia had pretty much disappeared from everyone's life. But we had done a lot of new business, and essentially, in attracting that new business, a real pivotal project that came to us was Airbnb. And this is what Airbnb used to look like. I'm sure you're all familiar with Airbnb, but this is essentially the story of how we came to work with them, and the work we've done, and a little bit of the reaction after that. So just to recap, Airbnb really was just a place where you can rent from local hosts around the world, and that's what they set up to do. But in that short time, in the way that Apple completely disrupted Nokia's marketplace, Airbnb had grown to a $30 billion company, and they were disrupting the hotel industry, which was incredible. So we were starting to work through this time where all these really interesting companies were coming from nowhere and disrupting industries, and Airbnb was one of them. But what Airbnb had done was they'd created this amazing product, this amazing marketplace, this platform where I could put my house or my room in my house or in my flat up, and I could let it and I could earn extra money. And in doing so, they created the shared marketplace, the sharing economy, and they are the darlings. Everyone says, oh, it's a sharing economy, the Airbnb of so-and-so. But what this did, this was their website from the time, this was kind of devoid of brand or emotion. They were just a listings website. It was very much about growth. It was driven really to enhance numbers, which all good startups should do. They start and they drive and they want to make sure their seed investment funding, gets good returns. But the challenge was, and this is what Airbnb realized, is that actually they'd built this massive community. I think at the time when they came to us, they had 400,000 listings, and they had this community of people that really believed in the shared economy, the sharing marketplace. And so what they wanted to do, and their challenge was actually bring that part of them to life, to really essentially differentiate themselves. And it first came about by contact from the design team and with a meeting with this guy. This is Joe Gebbia. He's one of the founding partners of Airbnb. And what's really great about both founding partners, actually, of Airbnb, Brian Chesky and Joe, is that they're designers. So they studied at the Rhodes Institute School of Design, which in big business is quite rare. But it was something that not only, I think, really drove the success of the project, but really drives the success of Airbnb, is that they're applying their kind of design-led thinking to big business, which was amazing. So they came to us. Essentially, it was an email that came to us one Monday morning, and someone, I think the marketing executive, said we had this email. Does anyone want to look at it? I was like, yes, please. I'd like to look at the email about the Airbnb rebrand. So we took that. And one of the first things we did, we had a video call, but we actually then flew for the chemistry meeting. We wanted to actually meet Joe. They offered it up to have a video call, but for us, it was more important to be in the room. So we flew from London to San Francisco just for an hour meeting. And it was to build that face-to-face relationship. And that's something we had done right at the very kind of early days, before DesignStudio even started at Nokia. It was building these really, really strong relationships. But by meeting Joe, we got to know him, even though just over an hour, and actually in the evening ended up going out for drinks with him. But we found out the big ambitions that these founding partners had for Airbnb. It wasn't just to be another kind of letting site where you could let things out. It was about enhancing this community. And really what they wanted to do is they wanted to create the world's first community-driven super brand. Essentially what they saw is that through the community, the Airbnb community, that they could achieve anything. They could harness and enhance and motivate this community, really just through their own love of each other, the community, to actually do great things. And it was this passion that we sensed, and that's essentially what inspired us and kind of informed the pitch work we did to win the project in the first place. So we really knew how much that Joe and Brian valued relationships, and they really spent a lot of time themselves getting to know their own community. They call themselves part of the community. So they don't see themselves as this management team who runs this corporation. They just see themselves as part of the community of Airbnb. So when it came to pitching for the job, when Joe came over to our studio to meet us, we wanted to show that we understood Airbnb. So what we actually did is, in our breakout space at the end of the studio, we actually built a bedroom and a small living room. So when Airbnb walked into our studio, it was like they were walking into a small Airbnb. And instantly what we'd done is we'd just shown how much we valued Airbnb, how much we understood them. And from them as a potential client, they were thinking, this agency has gone well above and beyond. We're not just here to see a boring keynote presentation. Paul presented croissants and orange juice because they'd just come off the plane. This was all about making them feel like they were still kind of essentially an Airbnb, but they were in DesignStudio.
And I think just to reiterate, that's that point about meaningful difference, is that that's not part of the brief. The fact that we met Joe and talked to him, through those face-to-face meetings, you start to understand what the meaningful difference is. You start to understand the brief was the difference, that's what they want to create, but the meaningful difference is that Joe had much grander ideas about what Airbnb was and what community was. And by doing that meant that We presented the pitch work. The pitch work was great. You can't just rely on building an Airbnb listing. The pitch work was fantastic. It answered the brief. But showing them that we understood the purpose of Airbnb, and we understood what it meant to be a host, and we understood what it meant to be part of a community, was what won them over and what made them kind of realize that there's an additional element to potentially working with these guys.
Yeah, for sure. So we won the pitch, and essentially we're trying to condense about 9 months worth of work here into a few slides. But fast forward a little bit, we won the pitch. It was great, and then that's when the hard work started. But for us, it wasn't about starting to design logos or trying to figure out what this brand was through graphic design. This was about us still listening to Airbnb, and a big thing of what we do is immersion. So we spent some time in Airbnb in San Francisco in their headquarters. We interviewed Joe, we interviewed Brian, but we went across the whole corporation. We interviewed finance people, we interviewed kitchen staff, we interviewed people who look after hosts, people in the community, to get a huge understanding of what Airbnb was, not just the vision from the founding partners, but what people who actually worked in Airbnb. We also sent some members of staff, some designers around the world. So they went to 13 different countries, and they had a territory each, and they would stay in an Airbnb, but then they'd also meet the Airbnb team that had started up in Rio and see what their problems was and their challenges. So we did this huge amount of research. But we also had to engage with them. So we also created workshops that really kind of play to their creative strengths. So I guess years ago, it would maybe be like this job had been run through a marketing department that were maybe a little bit more kind of suited to PowerPoints and simple kind of presentations. But we were now working with designers. I mean, the founders of Airbnb were designers themselves. We were working with creative directors at Airbnb and their own internal design team. So we had to create these workshops that were engaging, there were creative exercises, we had them drawing things, we had them pulling things from the internet, all to try and understand, again, what this meant for them as Airbnb. Now, essentially what we were doing was trying to get to the first stage, and that was really trying to understand their values. So what was it about Airbnb that was different from all the hotel industry that they were disrupting? So Hilton, for example, huge hotel chain, but Airbnb were taking large amounts of their customer base. But why? Why was that happening? So really, it all comes down to that thing of that you can feel like, I can go and stay at Pablo's house, and the experience I would have at Pablo's house, completely different staying at a Hilton. Pablo telling me about the coffee shop around the corner, the art gallery that the concierge at the Hilton would never know about. And it was all those things that really we started to understand as like what the value of the community saw in being part of Airbnb. And it was really driven by these things about people, about places, it's about love. So as me as a person could go to a place like Barcelona and feel like I was loved, feel like I was part of this community. And that's what essentially differentiated Airbnb from the big hotel chains and why people were coming to it in huge amounts. And it was understanding these values that really kind of started to form the proposition of belong anywhere. So Apple has think different, Nike has just do it, but what was Airbnb's proposition? And it was belong anywhere. It was this sense that through the values that we had understood and we had formed, that anyone could travel with Airbnb and felt like they could belong in that place.
Yeah, I think, we talked about what you can unlock amazing into these brands, and it was absolutely true. And, the British in general are the most cynical people you'll ever meet. And San Franciscans are probably the polar opposite in terms of their belief in that they're going to conquer the world. But actually, we stayed and we really immersed ourselves in Airbnb. And it's absolutely true. If you do go and stay with someone, and it can be a city or it can be the most remote part of the world, you're going to feel that you're at home, and it's like that thing makes Airbnb amazing. What makes it amazing is the fact you can travel the world and feel like you belong anywhere, and so that has to be that platform that we build everything from.
Oh, completely. And it was that platform of belong anywhere, and there was all the research we'd done, all the interviews, all the kind of workshops, all the creating those values built up to this proposition, this platform, that informed all the identity work. And it's actually this proposition that still informs all the creative work and the campaigns that you see from Airbnb. It's still a huge part of them, and it will be for forever, hopefully. But that's only half of the job, or if not a small amount of the job. The next part really was creating a symbol. So the next challenge was to create a symbol for Airbnb. Now, the aspirations of the owners of Airbnb, the founding partners, was it's the super brand. And the collection here of other logos that are the super brands, and we recognize these. And the reason why symbols are so powerful is that they transcend language. Airbnb was in nearly every country in the world. People from Spain could go and stay in Tokyo and they'd see the Airbnb symbol and they know it would represent community, and that's what we had to get to. I think that was the challenge.
I was going to say the other thing that they had, and we actually went through this process, was that they thought about changing the name of Airbnb because it came from, you probably know this, but it came from the idea of airbed and breakfast, because literally the first time they did it, they blew up an airbed, put it on the floor and served breakfast the next day. But the URL was way too long, so they shortened it to Airbnb. Even in English, Airbnb is the weirdest construct of letters. It doesn't make any sense. If you don't necessarily pronounce it the first time Airbnb, you probably say Airbnb or Airbnb, you don't get it. So they were like, we need to change the name. It's like people don't get it in China. It's going to be so hard to understand. But when we did that, we found there was already so much equity. I mean, there were a million people using this service, or a million hosts at one point, and I think, we can't just destroy something just because it's a work stream that we might potentially want to do. If there's valid evidence that says there's equity in this, then you shouldn't get rid of it. You have to find a workaround. And that's why I think we arrived at the idea of the symbol. The idea of the symbol is that, if we can build a brand as any of these brands, we do not need to rely on the name too much, because the name will become synonymous and the symbol will become a marker that can transcend language without any characters that anyone's going to misunderstand. So we're going to rely heavily on the symbol.
Yeah, so we knew this symbol had to work very, very, very hard for Airbnb. So taking those values. So here, this is a sketch actually from one of the designer's sketchbooks, whilst working on the project. And you may have seen this, some people already, because it's out there. But essentially what we have here is we have kind of some visual forms around the idea of places, around the idea of people, around the idea of love. And it was these kind of feelings and these semiotics and these values that really started to go in to the logos, to the initial sketches, and essentially fast forwarding again through quite a few design phases.
Yeah, I mean, this would be so easy if it was like, here it is.
Yeah.
No, I mean, there were about 10 routes, I think, that were presented. I think the reason we show this is because it was like a eureka moment, and not just for us. We worked collaboratively with the clients, and they saw us get to this stage, and it was a eureka moment for them as well, of like, this is it. This is imbuing the meaning that we want, and this is a symbol that's like actually kind of owns all of those values that we've discovered.
So yeah, after the eureka moment, lots of hard work, but eventually we came to this. So essentially what we have here is we have the Balo. This is the symbol that represents the community. This is a symbol that represents belong anywhere. But taking on those ideas of meaningful difference and taking on the ideas of why Airbnb is different to Hilton is because of the community. Now, there's an amazing opportunity, and Airbnb, right down to their very principles, kind of went with this, is we had to create this symbol that could be owned by the community. Essentially, the brand Airbnb was a community, so it's almost we had to give the brand back to the community. So going into this symbol had to be something that anyone could draw. Had to be something that people could draw in the sand, or they could make out of shapes. And essentially, again, it was just giving this symbol back to the community, which is incredibly brave. And so the next slide I'm going to show you is a movie. And what it does is it encapsulates all that thinking. This was a movie they used at launch, by the way, when the rebrand came out. But essentially what it does is it encapsulates all that thinking and it communicates it out to their community. So, as I mentioned earlier, this symbol, this brand was created so the community could own it. And this is a collection of some of the images that were created by the community. There was an Instagram account created where people would upload the balos they were creating. So there's a huge engagement by the community, which was amazing to see for us because it was brave. It was a brave kind of statement to open, for the brand to be opened up to different people to create different ways of doing it. It's a brave thing to do, but testament to Airbnb, they're a very brave company. Here's a collection of some of the identity work that we did. And I think one thing I really want to point out, again, this difference that Airbnb had with Hilton and people like that, is just this little image here. These are the names of the colours. And when you have a company that is authentic and as real as Airbnb, you can really get very granular in the details. So the colours there are named after the streets where the first ever listings were of Airbnb. And Rausch, which is the ready kind of pink colour, Rausch is the name of the street where Airbnb was founded. Brian and Joe put their flat as a listing. It was their first ever listing on Airbnb. So we could use this kind of information, this detail from the community to build it into the brand. A lot of people won't know that, people who use it day to day, but it's that kind of authenticity and information. When you have an opportunity to use it, it's absolutely brilliant. We then started to take the brand that we created across to digital platforms. We had to work on the iOS and the Android and the desktop. And actually, we also created down here, we worked with a company called RGA to create this platform where hosts could create their own logos. And again, they could go in there and make a digital manifestation of the Balo. And what they could do is they could actually create little bits of merchandise. So we were giving essentially all the micro-entrepreneurs that were the Airbnb community the opportunity to make their own Balo. And we have a little video here of the website, the desktop app. And if you remember back to the slide I showed you before, that was very, very listings driven. What we had done and what Airbnb wanted to do is they really wanted to bring through the spirit of the community and the brand and really kind of take it more to the stories of the community rather than just say, I want to travel on these dates to this place. This was, you can discover stuff now.
But it's about showing, so everything, every decision, the photography, the movie at the top is about showing real people, having these kind of moments, showing you the places. There's the bakery there, there's these kind of obscure places that you're only going to discover through a local kind of viewpoint. There's the place where actually, you can create your own symbol, so now the brand lives there. Before it just literally said, book your listing, when do you want to go? And it's like, it's gone from functional to kind of more emotional. And then finally was this, which is, the most powerful thing about brands, and brands often kind of neglect this or don't think they have them, is like the best way that you can educate people about a brand or about a product is by finding people who've had that experience, who've used it for its benefit. And they've got the most amazing stories about people who've transformed their lives through using this platform. From the guy that I met in New York who worked for the post office, he hated his job. He realized that he could rent out a room on Airbnb in his New York apartment, make the exact same money he was making from the post office by going to work every day. And so he gave up his job. Now he follows bands around New York, taking photographs, has built this blog, now has thousands of followers and is kind of following his dream. Now that's how to use Airbnb. That's why to use Airbnb, not just because you can book a place to stay for the next 3 days. And it's those benefits that I think they're trying to tell now through real community stories.
But there was a lot of science and a lot of thought that went into this. So in creating this Balo, in creating this symbol, we worked with a semiotics agency, and they sent out the work we'd done around the world, and we had it checked in Asia, in South America, about what this symbol actually meant. And what was great is actually loads of really positive stuff came back. So even our design work was validated globally, so we knew the decisions we were making were the right decisions for that company. And here we have a slide that kind of talks about the kind of the visual semiotics, I guess, of the Balo. But again, it's all very kind of positive. You know, it's feminine, it's got warmth, it's got care in there.
Well, what it did was like these things were popping up. So a lot of people, you'll probably remember the launch of Airbnb, these things were popping up like, oh, it looks like breasts, or it looks like this part of a man. And we were aware of them, but we were going through the process of kind of sense checking it, bringing it up to the attention, but there was so much positive that we were like, do you know what? People are going to spot these things. If we believe in this enough, we need to write it out because this is the brand that's right for us. We've all bought into it and the company completely did. But it's good to know that you've been through there and you have to do this as a brand is validate your work.
And at launch, we've never been through anything like this before. We'd actually never really launched a brand, never mind one of the most disruptive and influential brands of the last 10 years. But this happened. So Airbnb trended on Twitter at launch for 8 hours, which was incredible, but it wasn't all great. There were lots of people reading lots of things into the Airbnb symbol, and I'm sure you all know the story, and if you Google Balo, you will find lots of this. But what was amazing was later on Airbnb really embraced it, but people were doing things like this, and it's a short little video that someone went to a lot of lengths to create.
Your new logo looks like balls. Your new logo looks like...
So there was a huge reaction, and Paul was actually in San Francisco at the launch. I was safely far away in London with the rest of the design team. But we were like, you know, have we just created the biggest joke in design? And, you know, is everything going to collapse in? But what was amazing and what is brilliant about the spirit of Airbnb is that they embraced it. And actually this is something they created. They created the Balo report. So they essentially did an analysis of all the kind of things that the Balo had been referenced to. Animal parts, bodies, foods, transportations. And really, in the end, Airbnb stuck by it. They didn't, because there was the belief, and all the work we had done was built on foundations. We'd validated everything, the values were there. It was all there, and you know, Twitter does what Twitter does best, and people talk. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's really, really strong. It's still there. It was testing when it first launched, but yeah, it's out there in the world that we love.
So that's Airbnb. Is everyone else still with us? It's going on now. So we're in 2014. We've still got years to go. We're going to wrap this up. How long have we got?
Not long.
Let's pick up the pace. Buckle in, everybody. We've got to go through it quickly now. So 2014, I was in San Francisco. There I am. And we took on this pink place. So this was going to be our new San Francisco studio. And this is a coincidence, but it was that far from Airbnb. It literally wasn't planned like that. We had a place miles away and it fell through, and this place came up. It was great, it was perfect, and still today our studio is about 15 seconds walk from Airbnb, and here it is. So that's grew. We kind of knew that Airbnb was going to be huge news. We knew that San Francisco was a place full of the type of businesses that we were going to work with, or we wanted to work with, the kind of disruptive, exciting people who are creating the most amazing things in the world, and we knew that we had to be there. So we kind of invested a lot, took a huge risk, had no business plan. I don't think we've ever had a business plan, and just kind of landed there. I moved my entire family, and we just said, right, let's build a studio here. So I kind of sat on my own in the middle of this floor for a good 6 months, but you know, it's grown now, and I think there's around 10 people working full-time in San Francisco, and it kind of swells with freelancers, but they're trying to grow the business there. So we've been through that with Airbnb. We had that roller coaster. This is amazing. Oh my God, the world hates it. Like, actually, it's brilliant again. You know, it was a roller coaster, and during that time, I turned to the whole company and said, you know, we shouldn't panic. This is amazing. This is such a big thing that, if I'm honest, it'll probably never happen again. It's so rare that you get to work on a brand that has got so many eyes on it, that people care about so much that it's gonna be able to even kind of get that type of reaction. And then 2015, I had this note just sitting on my desk when I came back from lunch. And I'm going to set the timing for you here. I am a huge football fan, absolutely huge football fan. Manchester United fan, always have been. Don't judge me on that. But this was on the Friday as the Premier League season kicked off the next day. And I didn't know what this call was. It just said that. And for 1 minute, I thought, is this going to happen? Is this my time?
Paul has a lot of time for Photoshop.
I'm 37 now, but as I said, I've said this a lot. I think I've still got a lot to give the Premier League. You know, I've slowed down, but I've still got a lot to give. But I called them, but it wasn't that, and you know, frustrating. But it was the next best thing. They were asking us, would we be interested in kind of rebranding the Premier League? Oh my God, this was unbelievable. But I think the first thing that hit us was, this is going to happen again, because no matter what we do to the Premier League logo or brand, people are going to go crazy. People put the Premier League ahead of their wives, ahead of their children, so there's going to be a reaction. So we were aware of that. It's broadcast in 212 territories, and every game has apparently got this audience, this potential audience of 5 billion people. This is the biggest thing. This is huge, and there's a lot of passion around it. Right, I've got to speed up on this, haven't I? So look, why were the Premier League rebranding? Why, you know, we obviously won the pitch for this. I don't need to go into that, or else it'd be a very short story. But why were they rebranding? Well, if you know football, if you know the Premier League, you've probably always known it as the Barclays Premier League or the English Premier League. And this is the problem, that the Premier League had always had a sponsorship partner. And the Premier League itself, which is here, were just the company that organised the fixtures, they organised the referees, and they organised the TV rights. And so they'd never been at the forefront. They'd never had a voice about what they actually stood for or what they actually represented. And this year they'd managed to negotiate TV deals, which is probably why you've seen cherished assets like Guardiola popping up in the Premier League, because we've all of a sudden got £8 billion worth of funding in the Premier League. And I think the Premier League saw this as an opportunity that we don't need this title sponsor now. We've got enough money to go it alone. We can actually start building a brand similar to the NFL and the NBA that actually stand for something and people understand and cherish and wear. And we can start building a kind of real perception of what we stand for, not what people think we stand for. But there are a few, I guess, issues with it. The first issue is this, that their brand, in terms of the brand identity, it just didn't flex. And so if they're about to start telling their stories of why they exist, you know, they need to be able to talk very differently. I need to talk to every single individual in this room slightly differently. And if I have a brand that looks exactly the same, whether I'm talking to politicians in Downing Street or the under-12s kind of kick-about league on a Saturday, you know, it's not going to happen. I need to be able to flex this brand so I can talk to individuals differently in each time. The other thing that happened was this. TV, I just mentioned, that was the biggest asset they had, but they didn't have a brand that worked on TV. In the UK, we never see the Premier League identity on the TV graphics because we have the BBC and we have Sky and they do all of it themselves. But I don't know what you get here. If you see it, you probably see Premier League graphics and identity. But they had a logo that was so intricate, so detailed, a lion, that it just didn't work. That every time they wanted to do a wipe or something with motion, they had to animate this entire lion, and it was so complicated that technically it just didn't work. They had a brand that was built really before there were all of these elements of digital that they needed to address. You know, this brand didn't have to think about apps or being tiny on mobile phone screens. It just wasn't born of that era. And now they had this issue of when it sat at 24 pixels, it just disappeared, it blurred, it didn't work. So there were lots of technical elements. And the issue was on TV, like they quite often have to watermark things. And the lion, when it's inverted, turns into the creepiest Father Christmas. It just doesn't look like a lion anymore. So they had issues technically with the brand identity, but I think, you know, I've given this talk longer at a certain place, and the reason I give this talk is because I want to show that the brand identity is one thing, but the brand is much bigger than that. The brand is a feeling, the brand is that thing that makes it amazing, the brand is a whole emotion, all a purpose, and that's what we wanted to do. So it was like, what's the issue that the Premier League had there? Well, the issue they had was this, that the world were making their own opinions of what the Premier League stood for, and the Premier League to them stood for the sex scandals that players were having, the millions of pounds that it was lying in the pockets of players, the fast cars, the fact that they don't care about fans, ticket prices, they give nothing back to the community. So although people loved it, everything that they loved always had a negative. It's like the best players, but they're not English. Right through, it's the best league, but there's nothing aggressive. So people loved it, but then they hated it at the same time. And the thing was that a lot of these things weren't actually true. They were just because the Premier League had never told those stories about what the good work that they were doing. So they were actually doing amazing things for grassroots. They were building programs around the world to help disadvantaged kids and giving them a program that they could follow, get them out of troubled areas, etc. And not just in the UK, around the world, and especially in developing countries. So we told them that, you need to start telling these stories. But firstly, we are also going to have to build you a brand that can tell them to the right people in the right way. So instead of doing this, instead of being the Premier League that kind of is this beacon that fires out the exact same photocopied story, we need to build you a brand that can flex, that can adapt, and can talk to people completely differently. I'm going to be quick through these slides. So we always start in the same way. Ben talked to you about Airbnb. We become sponges at the beginning of the project. We do not just jump on the Mac and start throwing around colors and logo types and typefaces. We sit there, we approach our clients, and we actually sometimes use the phrase of we know nothing, which scares them a little bit sometimes. But what we mean is that we don't want to come in with any preconceptions. We want to sit with the people who work there. We want to sit with the fans in this case. We want to just absorb from the agencies that have been working with you, from your TV rights, from everything that you're doing. We want to absorb that to understand what it is that makes you amazing and what it is that we can change and talk about. So we did all of these things, like fan panels, obviously looking at like inside the other sporting brands, the Spanish leagues, etc. But the other thing we quite often do is talk about you cannot just focus on your category anymore. Football and the Premier League is an entertainment, and they're not just vying against football leagues for your attention on a daily basis. They're actually coming more into contact with people like Spotify or Sky or BBC. These are the things, Airbnb, things you're interacting with on your phone that are kind of taking your attention away from football. So we need to understand how they can live in that world as well. So the things we identified were 4 pillars to build upon. 1, exciting football. They have this. We don't need to touch it. 2, they've got a global appeal. I told you how big they are. There's no work needs to be done on making sure that the people of the world know about this brand. But the 2 things they needed to shift were, 1, we had to show that this money, although it makes them massively powerful, it's not just a power to line people's pockets, but this is actually a power to do good. This is a power to affect the world and make a real change. And the other thing we need to do is that show them that we're not just about the footballers, we're not just about the money, we're about everybody who makes football, from the people who turn up on a Saturday to watch it, to the kids who kind of watch it on TV or kick around at the park, to the tea lady or the kit man that's worked there for 20, 30 years. Without these people, the Premier League is nothing. So a lot of our job is, prior to doing any design work, is convincing the clients that this is what we need to do, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to change the perception of the world. And one of the tools we do is we create films, because we try and build this kind of state that they understand the emotional place that we're trying to put them in. And this is the film that we took to the Premier League to say, this is how the Premier League should change its kind of like communications.
Baby
So that was the key thought. You know, now it's about transitioning from this world of amazing football, you know, Aguero beating his chest on a Saturday, pulling at his shirt. It's now about showing actually that the people who are in and around football, the ordinary person, has as much time and should be kind of like viewed in exactly the same way as those players. So we all make it, and that's the kind of like thing that we try to sell in. This is how the business needs to shift. Of course, the identity needs to change. We need to look at it. We need to simplify that mark to make it work in this modern world. And the first thing we do, and people always question this, is you should have spoken to the fans. And we did, of course we did. And 90% of those fans told us that that lion was absolutely intrinsically linked and meant so much to them as part of the Premier League. You know, so it wasn't a case of, can we just strip the lion away and replace it with a football because that'd be easier to animate. 90% of people are showing that that's a passionate thing that they want to hold on to. So we had to find a way of simplifying this mark, making it work in this modern world. So we actually did something we've never done before, which was eye tracking technology. And this is crazy, but it was just like a way of like, well, what is it? What's the elements that people really focus on, and in what kind of way do they focus on them? And I guess it was fairly obvious that people instantly were kind of drawn to the face. It makes sense, and when you look back at it, it's obvious, but you still need to prove that you've been on this journey. The face is what holds the emotion. The eye is the way you engage, whether it's a person, whether it's an animal. It's just the way that you're attracted. And it was kind of seen as like, well, then how can we kind of bring this back down, focus on that face, and make a mark that still represents the Premier League and represents everything it stood for? And what does the lion stand for? Well, there are 2 lions that sit on the Premier League, and there are 3 lions that sit on the England shirt. And the Premier League is meant to have been born from the Football Association in England and those 3 lions. So when we questioned why there are only 2 on the trophy, there was a really nice story behind it, that the 3rd lion is the captain of the winning team on the last day when he lifts that trophy above his head. That's the 3 lions. And there's a nice story behind it. So we said we need to see the trophy. You know, we need to work from that mark, understand, you know, what this lion is and the heritage of it. But as you can imagine, the Premier League are not too happy about just sending the Premier League trophy out to an agency. So they made us swear that if it comes over, it must sit in one of our locked rooms. It cannot move. We have to hire a security company, and we can take photos and drawings from it, but we must not touch it. Which was never going to happen. There's one of these as Ben as well. The first thing that happened as soon as that landed on my desk, there's Ben taking a photo, I can see your reflection. That had to be lifted up. But we had it in the studio, and we did start to look at it. Ooh, I think that image is missing. We started to look at it, we started to see where the brand had come from, and actually when we looked back at the Premier League, the mark in the original days was the exact replica of this, and gradually it turned around. They'd focused more on the face, they tried to simplify it. And I'm again jumping over masses and masses of work because we've not got much time. But, you know, we tried everything. We had, I'd say, thousands and thousands of versions of lions. And even though 90% of people had said that the lion had to stay, we did try routes that didn't have the lion as well. But obviously, it'd have to be something amazing for us to kind of discount all of those people. So it did come back to the lion, and it did end up at the mark that you've seen today, which I'm sure you've seen. And this is a mark that, you know, can work at that tiniest of sizes. It can work on any small scale digital where it's just in the top browser kind of URL bar, or it can work on huge ATL sizes. One thing we learned throughout the process is you just cannot invert a lion. It turns into a creepy Father Christmas. It's just, so we have to figure out a way to make a lion work. And so you've maybe not even noticed this, but there are 2 versions of the lion. And this lion is completely created just to work on those backgrounds where it needs to stand alone. The other thing we did was like show them that now it sits in a different world. Now this mark doesn't leap out. It does sit in this digital world. It does sit against these brands that they are competing for your time with, and it does feel like it sits there. We tried to figure out the workaround. So this was still a lion. All the broadcast teams, that was their problem, saying that the lion's too hard to animate. So how do we create a language that sits with the lion, that grows from the lion, but means that there are easier ways of bringing it to life? So we built this language that is all built from the mane and the angles within that kind of shape to kind of like show them that this could come to life and create these textures without having to animate full lines all the time. And we had to do everything. I mean, we had to work with every partner. So we worked with Nike. They make something ridiculous like 1 billion footballs. I know it sounds like an exaggeration, but that's absolutely what they told me. They print 1 billion footballs.
It's the first artwork that went out as well.
Yeah, and so we have to test these things that they're working on leather, which isn't the normal thing that you're testing brands for. It's also having to work on kind of like shirts of players. We were actually working with different teams and legal teams to make sure that these brands could like not be copied easily. So those badges that are on the arms, they've got some technology in them that means it's very hard to copy and to sell them at the kind of black markets. So talking to legal teams is just as important as talking to marketing and brand teams, because you need to understand all the facets of the business. And this is how the brand looks today. I'm sure you've seen it everywhere. There's so much more story behind it, but you're seeing it now come to life. I might skip this movie. You've seen it come to life on TV. I'm going to skip this because we haven't got time. But what we tried to build was a brand that can still live in this corporate world. So when it needs to sit in an annual report, when it needs to sit in an official letter to the government, it can still work and seem very grown up and very kind of austere. But it can also quite easily sit week posted, sitting outside the most kind of like disruptive kind of places in London or around the world. It feels kind of comfortable there as well. So it can flex and it can completely change. When you launch a brand like this, especially a brand like this with so much focus on it, you want to tell a bit of this story. You want to tell the reasons that you've made certain decisions so that people can at least make an educated reaction to it. However, the Premier League were also looking for an advertising partner at this time, and as they went out to find one, the news leaked that the logo was being looked at. And a national newspaper in the UK called the Premier League and asked if this was going to change. And the Premier League said, yes, as part of our moving away from our title sponsor, we will be changing the logo of the Premier League. But in the UK, we love to make a bigger story out of things. Our press is notorious for twisting the news slightly. So just changing the logo is not going to cause the reaction. What would cause the reaction? What would really annoy 90% of people? To say that we're going to cut the lion from the Premier League logo, which is absolutely not true, and we already know 90% of people are going to go crazy if that happens, but the news leaked like that. The news then started picking up on the famous, do you remember Cecil the lion that was killed in Zimbabwe by the American dentist? Well, then this started happening. The internet woke up.
DesignStudio killed Cecil. That's really what happened.
Twitter then woke up of saying, there are things you don't do, getting rid of the lions, one of them. Rest in peace, Cecil the Premier League lion, you will be missed. This is one of my favourites though, a truly awful week. First Bowie, and now this. So it's the same week that Bowie died, which kind of dates it, which puts it in space time. But it was up there with that news. So the Premier League reacted and they just launched this, and they just said, here it is, this hasn't happened, this is going to be the new brand. And it made those stories go away, but if I'm honest, to me, we're missing that whole point about meaningful difference. This is a difference, but without that story about showing those ideas, this has nothing to say, we all make it. This is not saying that we're going to change the way we tell our stories. It's not going to say we're telling as much stories about the fans and the community as we're telling about the players. And so it killed that story, but it wasn't great for me. It didn't feel like it captured the entire brand, but I knew that we had to wait for that to come. But the internet changed. It changed into this. Whenever you launch a brand with colours, it's always noted that someone has an 8-year-old or a 6-year-old relative who could have done it better. I find these things, this is funny because I actually presented this slide at the brand new conference saying that I hate it when blogs pretty much just focus on, which logo's better, which one's great, do you like this one? Fine, but as I'm saying, it's like the tiniest thing. A logo is a full stop at the end of a beautiful story. That's the way we always talk about it. Like the story is the brand. The logo is literally that tiny thing that the brand builds the meaning into. So just focusing on this tiny thing to me is like great. If people love it, brilliant, but it's not the brand. And I think, there may be some people in this room who comment on these things and get so focused on the tiniest thing, like, I wouldn't have done this, actually I would have done that. But, you've got to understand that whole process that we've been through. There will have been thousands and thousands of versions of lines that would put on that board, and they've been taken down and tweaked and changed, either because they don't imbue the meaning or because they don't work or something. There's lots of feedback that goes in there. So every little facet of that brand identity has been created for a reason, not just because two of our designers like that typeface. So you get this as well. This usually comes out, which really is funny because it illustrates the things that you're trying to move away from. There's about money. But I think Ben and I really like this one. There's something we
very creative.
Really like. It captures. It's very intelligent. Yeah, it's really. But this is the thing that we love, and this is the thing I hope you'll see with the Premier League. And you probably haven't even seen it yet because it's not an overnight thing with a brand like this. It could take years. I think the most recent Airbnb campaign about live there, belonging there, is the most on-brand campaign that they've done, and it's 2 years after we finished the work. And this is the big shift. So if you follow the Premier League, Leicester, an underdog, won last year. Key player, Jamie Vardy, all the newspapers are about him. This is a photo of Jamie Vardy signing the shirt of a child who's not even a Leicester fan, he's a Crystal Palace fan. And we've absolutely shifted the camera to the fact that we're focused so much on what this is bringing to this kid, his dad that's proud on the side. And Jamie Vardy, if I hadn't have told you, you probably wouldn't even recognize it's him. And this is trying to show that shift. And this is the shift that we're trying to imbue through everything we're doing with the Premier League. Stories like the lady here who sits outside Crystal Palace. She knits scarves and hats, and she's been following them for like 40 years, and she sells them on match day. Showing the kind of diversity in the crowds at the Premier League now. It's still seen very much as like this home of the white racist violence. And although there's parts of that going on, you can't get around that. It has changed so much. There are so many more diverse fans. There's so much more diversity in the crowds. And then focusing on the impact that this has on children's lives around the world and trying to photograph those in beautiful ways that are just given as much time as those photos of those amazing players. Have I got time to show this?
Yeah.
Okay, so this movie that I'm going to show now is something we did for the Premier League. They didn't ask us to do it, but this is about showing, our belief in what they need to do. You're always trying to educate the client of like what they need to do. So we heard about this story that for us summed up what the Premier League can do and the power that it has without having to spend money, just the power that the Premier League has. And we sent a couple of guys up to capture it, and it's a 3-minute story, and I hope you kind of understand it.
My name is Archie Palmer and I support West Bromwich Albion. I love the Baggies because of the just atmosphere of all the fans and the players, and I think we're a very good team. We have a good chance of beating any team in the whole world, to be honest.
My name's Miles Hemsley and I support Liverpool Football Club. When I was young, my dad supported it and I've just supported it then for the rest of my life. I've seen them quite a lot of times at Anfield and then today.
I used to live in a different area from here, and the first time we moved here we looked at a few schools.
He came in one day in year 4 and he didn't know anybody, and when he had his bad days because he just was scared and nervous and didn't know anybody, I said, "You can come sit by me, I'll look after you." We have been having our falling out days, but we've never not been friends.
There's one thing that we do agree on, Liverpool's the better team.
I think we'll have to rearrange that, Miles.
In November last year, I got diagnosed with leukemia.
The first day I found out, I was very upset about it. I didn't really know what to do. My mum came and picked me up from school that day, and when I told her, me and my mum both fought at that very point to try and do something for him.
Archie, my best friend, he put an appeal on Twitter saying, "Oh, can a Liverpool player come in to see my friend who's in hospital?"
I just kept on trying and trying. We kept on trying for weeks. And then when ex-Liverpool legend Didi Hamann offered to come and visit Miles in hospital, I think it was a great time for Miles and me.
My dad was like, "Oh, here's a friend, Didi Hamann." I was like, "Who?" And then he came in, he was like, "This person was a magical player for Liverpool." I was like, "Oh." Then everything just happened and I was getting video messages from everybody, and then John Henderson came along and sent a video message.
"When you get a little bit better, you can come and meet us. You'll never walk alone. See you soon, mate."
And then it just went wild, and I've had non-stop messages and surprises.
Once West Brom saw what I had done for Liverpool, they decided to make me and Miles both guests of honour at the West Brom versus Liverpool game.
We're going to be walking onto the pitch and going to meet some of the players.
It's just overwhelming, it's going to be amazing. I think it's gotten through most of his tough times. While he's having his chemo, I think he's been playing football and it's been making him confident. And this whole Liverpool experience is just helping him through all of his tough times. He's handled this whole thing very, very well. He's very calm about it.
We've always been by each other's side and just the best friend that I could ever have.
So it's those stories that, you know, they didn't cost a fortune for the Premier League, but it shows that actually those players, you know, they're not just all about the money, they're not just about the fast cars, they actually do have this power to do good, and it kind of humanizes them as well. And I think there were so many of these stories surrounding the Premier League, and it's a little like I said with Airbnb at the very end. You don't need to fabricate huge marketing stories to kind of show that true purpose behind something, because there will be amazing stories out there about these amazing brands. You just need to take the time to find them and bring them to life in really beautiful, engaging ways. And so I'm hoping that the Premier League, as it evolves over time, you'll start seeing more and more of these stories come to life. Okay, we're nearly there.
We're nearly there,
it's
yeah.
dragging on, isn't it?
Should we relieve you of your your speech?
Yeah.
Give you a break.
Monologue,
yeah. So I guess we're kind of coming to the end. Well, 2016, for us it's been an amazing year. We've really built on, I think people saw us as Airbnb, who are DesignStudio, they've won Airbnb, Lucky Studio, and then obviously things like Logitech and Premier League happen. But we're now starting to see this is some of the work we've been doing. So we recently launched Deliveroo, which hoping you guys have seen out here in Barcelona, working with really interesting companies like Rolly. There's a campaign that is going into Apple stores and Logitech and people like Treatwell. So for us as an agency, we've kind of shifted from, as we spoke about earlier, this one client agency that was Nokia that we built on, but the foundations and everything that we kind of prided ourselves on, built on, still ring very true for us today. So now this is a collection of our clients lists from San Francisco office and the London office put together. So for us, it's really been an 8-year journey to make us the agency that we are today. And I think at the end, we just want to share, because we were students ourselves one day, that's where we started, so we just want to share a few kind of insights and things that we've learnt along the way.
I feel like I'm going to perch on this for this section of the talk, because this is like the wise bit. This is something we learned along the way. So if you're going to start your own agency, I think you have to listen. You have to absorb what people are telling you. You have to take the advice. But something we learned, and we probably learned the painful way, is that you can actually listen too much. You know, if you're building something that's unique to you, if you're building something that's from a belief, then sometimes it's going to challenge what you're hearing from other people, because they will have built something different in the past. If you listen too much, you're going to kind of build what they've built. So we have a bit of a theory in DesignStudio, and this applies to our work as well. It's called head, heart, and hand. The head bit is that strategy, is that data, is that thinking, the statistics. The hand bit at the end is about the craft and bringing that to life. I've talked about those two. The one in the middle is the heart. And this is something that you can't quantify, and this is something that's always a challenge when we talk to brands, especially in San Francisco, we're so data-driven, is that sometimes there is just a strong belief that something is right, and you cannot discount it just because you haven't got the data to back it up. Airbnb would never have existed had Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia not followed their heart. When they launched that, Brian once told me that the feedback he got when he talked through to a very experienced venture capitalist, the guy said, "I hope that's not all you're working on, Brian." So if he'd have listened and taken that advice, he'd have just finished. But he believed in his heart that actually he could make it. It was something that people wanted, and now it's a $35 billion business. So you can listen too much. Hey, we've got this great thing at DesignStudio that's about head and I've talked about that. And I've talked about that. I've done both those slides. That was Brian Chesky. Okay. Make a meaningful difference. We talked about this at the beginning. I mean, that's the way we phrase it. But I think if you're going to start an agency, you need to think about what's the meaningful difference. Don't just start something because you want to create another graphic design agency or you want to create something. People buy into something that you stand for. And I think the reason, aside from the hard work that we put into the pitches, aside from trying to find something different that we can kind of like, you know, amaze the clients with, showing our thinking, they buy into the passion that we have. And the people that work for us also have that passion as well. And when you're stood up against someone who's being employed as a new business function and they're pitching, they don't have that kind of burning desire in their stomach to kind of really do this because they believe in it and love it. And so you need to think about that. You need to make that meaningful difference. And even if those first people kind of repel that and say, it's not right, I don't believe in it, stick with it, because you will find people who believe in the product because you believe in it, and you'll find like-minded people. And if you push it, you will build a great success. Anything else you want to add to that?
I think that's it.
Bit of Spanish. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There's probably an accent on that somewhere, isn't there? Have we got questions? Have we got time for questions? Oh.
Yeah?
Yes? Oh.
It's a microphone.
Hi. You were saying in the start that you always wanted to make a difference. But when you were a younger company or a smaller company, how did you present yourselves to the brands so you could win the pitch? I mean, you just went there with your concept that, well, we want to work more with, like, from the heart or make a difference with you. How did you present yourselves?
Yeah, it's yeah, good question. Very good question. I think for us, it's always difficult when you're a new agency, but we just always from the start wanted to strip away the bullshit, if you excuse my language. And I think people really connected with that. We were just ourselves. We didn't pretend to be a bigger agency. We were designers. We wanted to give people a design experience, and that's what we built ourselves on. Not everyone wanted it. Some companies don't want that. They want the big kind of branding experience with the planners and the account directors. And for us, when we were starting, it's like, no, this is us, but we know we can deliver a great project for you. And it was just being honest and authentic as to who we are.
But do you mean, how do you get recognized as an agency as well? Or how do you even get on the pitch lists?
No, I mean...
I'm asking you a question.
No, because you said that I want to work from my heart,
yeah,
to show, make a difference, and you scored like a big, like an enormous client that it was Airbnb. I mean, it might be difficult for me to think, how did you, just with your concept, I mean, it's a good concept, but to go to a company just with that, it might be, or not to show anything, like, you didn't show maybe logos and stuff until the very end when you understood the company. How did you
well, that's about presenting that ethos at the beginning. And again, I think, you know, walking people through the reasons that you make those decisions, showing them the impact of the brands, or what you believe the impact of the brand will make based on a purpose rather than just based on visual. I think people actually respect it a lot more. So we still today will get approached a lot of the times like, hey, we've got this brand and it's X amount. So we'd love you to come in with a creative pitch and then show us, you know, 3 routes, let's say 2 routes, the classic evolution and revolution logos. And we argue back and say it's pointless. It's absolutely pointless. All you're going to see is a demonstration of some graphic design, and you can see that from our website if you need to, because it's not based on a solid purpose. And we've already talked about the fact that we need to research and understand why we're making these decisions. And I think actually, once you've talked about that, it sometimes elevates you from the other agencies that have gone in there and just shown loads of logos, because what does it mean? It's absolutely meaningless. And I think once they've seen the impact that purpose has to a brand like Airbnb, etc., they kind of respect your decision.
Thank you.
Any more?
Nope. Nope. Okay.
Is that it?
That's it.
That's it.
Thanks.
We answered every question in the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Two minutes past 9.